enjoying taking care of business, hit subscribe on YouTube and follow on Spotify. It helps the show grow, supports creators behind the scenes, and gives you access to original insights from extraordinary guests. Now let's get into today's episode. Okay, so this is the part where I do sort of a "this is your life so far." So here we go. Susan, you are the co-founder of Harbour, the largest privately owned litigation fund globally. You're one of the trailblazers of the litigation funding industry. For more than 23 years, you have been sourcing and investing in groundbreaking cases, shaping public policy across multiple jurisdictions, building global relationships with some of the most respected law firms in the world. But you're not just a pioneer, you are a leader. As chair of the Association of Litigation Funders, which you are a founding member of, and a board member of the International Legal Finance Association, you've helped steer the industry's growth and standards worldwide. From qualifying as a solicitor in 1992 to practicing in both the UK and the US, where you served as a British diplomat, you bring a rare mix of legal, financial, and international experience. And I really cannot wait to dive into your story and insights on today's episode of Taking Care of Business. So thanks again for being a guest. As I said, I've been very excited about speaking with you. And I can't wait to get stuck in.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to it, having seen other ones that you have done. So, yeah.
Well, that's really kind of you.
Dive in.
So, as I said, you qualified as a solicitor in 1992, and you have an extraordinary career spanning law, diplomacy, and entrepreneurship. So, looking back, what first drew you to litigation and ultimately litigation funding?
Yeah, well, look, when I was attracted to being a lawyer and then becoming a litigator, of course, litigation funding didn't exist then, so it wasn't even that was something which I thought, well, I'll do this and then I'll become a litigation funder. And it's funny with like A-level results coming out yesterday and students looking at what their choices are and going to university or not going to university. What we as a group of lawyers were chatting about is just to some extent how easy it was to do that, because you didn't have to make any decisions. If you decided you wanted to be a lawyer, you were like, okay, there is a process I have to go through, and then I come out the other end and I'm a qualified lawyer, and then you kind of take it from there. And I honestly don't know what I would have done if I had not known that that's what I wanted to do. Because, coming out of the end of doing a degree, and my big advice whenever parents, friends who've got children who are contemplating, they say, which law degree should I do? Actually, I mostly say to them, don't do a law degree. Do a degree in the subject that you love, because you will always tend to do better in a subject that you did really well at school and you have a genuine passion for. And I think I probably regret doing a law degree and wish I had done something else that I was sort of genuinely interested in. And I think to some extent, part of that is I'm not sure you're mature enough at the age of 18 to sort of understand all this case law and these things about topics that you've got no experience of. And I think, therefore, that to do something that you really like is much better, because you will always do really well at something that you're really good at. So the lawyer bit was when I was clearly a very kind of overly ambitious child, because I had written down when I was about 8 that when I grow up I want to be a lawyer, a social worker, and prime minister. And you kind of think, oh my God, what a priggish child you were at 8, right? The lawyer thing actually is because it combines lots of things, and it is increasingly what you want it to be. I think it is a much less straitjacketed career than it perhaps once was. And again, I was talking to somebody, I think it was at a wedding at the weekend, and chatting to a friend's husband and saying that, to some extent, there's no great mystique about being a lawyer, but without doubt, it gives you a really particular way of looking at things, of how quickly you can analyze and assimilate information. And you realize then that that is actually the unique skill that comes from that qualification, which is incredibly valuable in then a range of activities, which don't have to just be about being a lawyer. And then, of course, the litigation funding thing. Well, my life then became a series of accidents, and that's when the litigation funding thing came into play.
I think that's such a great story. And I can really resonate with everything that you have said, really. I mean, I left school when I was 16 and went down a hairdressing path and did that for a good couple of years before coming to the conclusion that I wanted to have more of a corporate career. And ultimately, once I had done various jobs in order to get me into an office, because otherwise, what real office job can you get with an MVQ hairdressing? Like, you can't. I started working in Radcliffe Chambers and was introduced to the legal world. And I've said from that kind of point, if I went into university at the age of 18, I would have been going out with my mates, not taking it seriously, not getting the
Mm,
grade.
mm.
And it is such a young age to say, this is what I want to do with my life. And this is what I need to do it. And I mean, how boring would a life be if you knew exactly what it is that you wanted to do and then had tunnel vision? So yeah, completely agree with everything that you have said. And there's still time for you to be prime minister. So watch this space.
Well, I've been involved because trying to get this piece of legislation sorted on PACCAR has
Yeah.
had me exposed much more to both the Commons and the Lords and all of that process. And you're like, wow, the labyrinthine process of trying to get a tiny piece of legislation done is quite something. So, but it's fascinating. As somebody who was always interested in politics and is very much somebody who kind of grew up in the kind of the Thatcher years and all that went with that, and yeah, having been fascinated by it, I think now at this age that holds zero allure to me. But it's nice to kind of go through that door and look into those things. And yeah, look, in my family, on the sort of male side of the family, all three, like dad, brother, nephew, left school at 16 and all did apprenticeships and engineers and all the things. And doing all three did amazingly well. And so I think apprenticeships are something that we should be so pushing. We really, really should. And they are so undervalued. And I think the problem is that they're not explained enough at schools, are they, about what it is they mean. And my nephew would only have known about that opportunity for him because of what his dad and his granddad had done, that he had examples of, oh, that looks like something I want to do. I don't want to be in an office. I want to be, they do high voltage electricity. I want to be out doing, solving, fixing problems. And I think, unless you know about things, how can you know that it's something you want to do? But can I also say, you will always be a popular friend if you are a hairdresser, though, right?
Yes. Like that altogether.
Yeah.
But no, that's part of the reason as well why I set up this podcast, because there isn't enough information out there about career opportunities and different paths to go down. And I think that hearing stories like yourself is just a fantastic way to kind of have a catalogue, if you like, of different career paths, so people can make more of an informed decision
I
about
agree.
what they do.
Yeah, really important.
So litigation funding began to emerge as a fast-growing and attractive asset class in the early 2010s. But you, Susan, set up your first fund in 2002 before
Really?
going on to co-found Harbour in 2007, positioning yourself among the pioneers in this space.
Mhm.
So what I'm interested to know is, what practical steps did you take to establish Harbour, but also to guide it to become the largest privately owned litigation fund?
Yeah, well, it was interesting going from that first fund, which was we had just about £1 million when we started out, and we set it up as just an English limited company, and it was a kind of friends and family endeavor to kind of test the concept working in the insolvency arena. And that was very different then to Harbour. So when Harbour was first set up, it was part of a multi-strategy hedge fund. And where ordinarily within that fund, people doing investing would just sort of take a part of the pool of cash that the investors had invested, the decision was made, which turned out to be a super good decision subsequently, to set it up as a separate kind of entity, if you like, from the general pool of funds. So quite a lot of work was put into creating the separate structure for Harbour. And what that meant was that when the multi-strategy hedge fund ended up closing its doors, there was this standalone entity that was Harbour, which we were able to just take out and carry on in the way that it had been done before, because a lot of great thought and money had been spent on that structure of the fund and the whole thing, which meant that then when you were getting external investment, you already had this structure that was well established, well recognized, well understood by investors, and they were very happy with that as a structure. So we were very fortunate that the sort of caution about the initial structure was something which proved useful when we then spun it out in 2009.
Nice. I mean, you've done so incredibly well. It's such a fantastic story to hear. So everybody brings something unique to their leadership and career. What do you see as your unique selling point that has set you apart and contributed to your success?
Yeah, well, it's it's a good question, isn't it? And you sort of reflect back, particularly the older you get, on what do you think of the things, and some of the qualities that I think initially kind of get you to making progress are also things which you have to reflect on along the way. And to give you an example of that, so I see an opportunity in everything. And that's fantastic in terms of making you incredibly proactive, saying yes to everything, talking to everybody, because you just think, I'm going to learn something from every conversation I have. Even if I learn, I never want to talk to that person again. But I'm going to learn information that is always going to be valuable. As you progress, what you have to learn is that there isn't opportunity in absolutely everything. So then you have to, and I had a brilliant marketing person who we worked with for a while, Liz, who was phenomenal in saying to me, you need to, if you like, sort of categorize people to decide how you're going to spend your time, and recognize that it is just not the case that X type of person ever provides any opportunity. So, don't stop sending them information on a general basis, but make sure you focus your efforts on what she called the kind of VIPs and ambassadors and VIP. And the categories of those are, so the VIPs are the people you definitely want to work with, want to be doing cases with, and ambassadors are your kind of top of the league people who, as she characterized it, are talking about you positively even when you're not in the room. And those are your number one people to, if you like, look after, nurture, make sure you keep up to date, stay in touch with. They are your absolute top person. So it was really good, because then every time somebody said, oh, can I have a coffee with you, or do you want to have lunch, or do you want to do this, I would actually just stop for a moment, and rather than just saying yes, it would be, okay, now how is this categorizing going? And the part of the thing that I found hard about it is I didn't like that feeling of transactionality of engagements with people. But, you do have to acknowledge that there's an element of that to what we're doing, and that you really must be strict with your time, because it's a really costly resource. And I mean that both in terms, obviously, of the cost of employing people and all of that, but in terms of your energy and I have my great friend Claire, who talks about in life there are radiators and drains, and you want to spend your life with the radiators, not with the drains, because again, it's that sort of then the energy that's generated from that keeps propelling you forward. So I suppose that sort of sense of opportunity and everything, and I've always had a massive sense of urgency, so that propels me a lot. It's like I want to get things done, I want to get things done now. That and I'm quite decisive. I think mostly not too decisive, but I think quite decisive. And I think all of those things, particularly in the early years when it was just me, which is quite lonely, is really, really helpful, because it means you are very self-motivating, and you just kind of, create and seek to go out and create the opportunities. And I do look back and I think, oh my goodness, I had so much, well, front, for want of a better word, in terms of like I had no qualms about inviting myself to everything, and things like getting in front of the Civil Justice Council early on, and just looking back and going, gosh, I don't know whether I'd have that much front nowadays. But I think, it's one of the benefits of youth or being younger, is that you almost don't know not to do something. You become more cautious, I think, with age, and to some extent that's a bit of a shame, actually, because and then you lose that kind of, well, I can do anything sort of approach, right?
Yeah, I do think I think the same as you, but I've also met a ton of young people who are really backwards in coming forwards. And I just
Hmm.
think to myself, if you don't back yourself, like nobody else is going to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Number one, because, you got to be your own biggest cheerleader because everybody's on their own path. But number two, if you're not backing yourself, perhaps the person who you want to be in front of isn't going to think that you're ready or, believe in yourself. So I do try and really help people come forward as you did at the beginning and still doing now. And I do believe that you would still do it at this point because it just seems like that's the kind of person you are. And I wanted to ask, you know, as I just said, you're a go-getter, you have this sense of urgency, you're decisive. If there is somebody at the beginning of their career that doesn't have all of these attributes, do you think that it can be trained, or do you think that you just have to have it inside of you?
No, I think it can. I'm feeling I feel like I'm at a very reflective age about sort of, other things I like doing, and going back and thinking, well, and then thinking myself, that 8-year-old child who was actually, very kind of quiet and shy, and it's and almost, you've been wearing this mask of confidence, because it's fake it till you make it, right? And because if you don't look confident to people, then they're not going to listen to what you say. And of course, as a young lawyer, you have to give your clients confidence that you know what you're talking about, and that's really important. I mean, look, I do think there are some things that do make it more difficult from today, and I don't know quite what we do about that. Other than certainly it is the responsibility of old lawyers, or whatever role they're in, to keep nurturing the younger people. But look at the things, and again, marketing person I talked to about, Liz, she said, this was a number of years ago still, and she said, it's so weird. She said, I go into a law firm now and they're so quiet. And she said, when you and I were starting out, she said, when you would go into a law firm, go onto the floor of a particular law firm, it would be a hubbub of phones ringing, of people talking, of so much. And now they're so quiet, because people talk much less on the phone, and there is much less of that engagement that's going on. And, you know, it's apocryphal or something, but, you know, that there are law firms now who are having to teach people how to almost have a conversation or have a telephone call. And, you know, I had an ability to get lots of new business into the law firm when I was very junior. And the partners I worked for said, "Well, how are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just talking to people, asking them questions, and then saying, well, we could do that for you." You know, I never saw it as rocket science. It was about being constantly curious, asking people the questions, and you know, that the constant curiosity is absolutely at the heart of what you need to be doing. And I think that people have just become, because of phones, social media, the way that people communicate, they've become very socially anxious, and therefore they feel they're going to make a mistake in how they engage with people, so they don't even start. And I think that's an incredible shame. My law firm, when it hired the 22 trainees that we were, their approach to hiring was, and this was Rag and Co, now Gowling, their approach was this. They said, look, we're going to assume you're smart, and the test that we have is this. At the time, they only had one office in Birmingham. And they said, you know, we've got a meeting in London, and we've got the most important client of the firm, got the train journey from Birmingham to London. It's the senior partner, most important client, and you, the trainee. Senior partner misses the train. Are we going to be okay about leaving you with the most important client of the firm? And if the answer is no, and you have a first from Cambridge or whatever, but you can't just sit and have a sensible conversation, we don't actually want that first from Cambridge, because that is as important as you being smart and good at your job. And I thought that was a very kind of pragmatic, way ahead of its time sort of approach to hiring people who were, you know, certainly not in my case, have a first from Cambridge, but you had well-rounded people who were able to hold their own in lots of different circumstances with lots of different types of people, and that just shone through when you started at Rag and Co. And Rag and Co was, I realized subsequently, the most phenomenal place to train. When I then talked to my peers about how their years had been, and I was like, wow, it was like I was in some kind of fabulous cult. And I'm forever grateful that that's where my working life began.
I think, you know, as you were saying at the beginning of the interview about, you know, perhaps doing something that's not a law degree, that can kind of go to that, because you're not so kind of tunnel vision in just law. You have more experience outside of that, and yeah, I think that probably adds to it as well. So you have advised numerous governments on funding policy. Which developments or policy shifts do you believe will most shape the future of litigation funding over the next few years?
Well, you know, it's interesting because, I mean, I particularly remember like working on things in Hong Kong. And I think Cayman was brilliant because they kind of did a fast forward up, having seen what other people were doing. And Hong Kong, I think, is holding itself back a little bit by not just going ahead and saying, look, funding can be used in all types of cases, not just insolvency and arbitrations. I think that's a great shame. So I hope that changes. And Singapore kind of took a slightly more speedy approach to opening up the use of funding. I think, you know, in the end, it isn't so much. I mean, there are regulatory things which can end up hampering and killing off funding. So we just had that recent example in the potential tax that was going to be levied in the US under the Tillis part of Trump's big, beautiful bill, as he calls it, which happily went out by the time the bill itself passed. But you know, that it was going to add 41.5% tax to, or 40.5% tax to litigation funding. Well, that would just be the end of funding. So in a way, I think it's those negative things which are really risk, because there just seems to be such a sort of emotionally negative response to funding, which I just don't understand, because what we do is really not that controversial. We pay bills for a living to enable people to have the choice about how they pay for an activity. It really isn't that controversial, and yes, it generates so much emotion. Um, so so I do, but conversely, I do think, for example, if you look at the Civil Justice Council's recent report, it was such a thoughtful piece of work about actually things beyond funding and how we all should be looking at these things, which I thought was really positive. And I think the thoughtfulness was really refreshing, as opposed to this sort of, oh, it's all bad news and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I just felt like actually that group had really kind of properly understood what funding is. So I think we need more of that sort of demonstration of understanding of how these things work and the value that it has. Because without doubt, absent funding, the CAT wouldn't exist. Every case there is funded, and a lot of very, very worthy cases just would not happen. And the naysayers of funding tend to be those who just don't want to be sued. Well, you won't be sued if you don't do anything wrong. I mean, it's pretty simple. And then if somebody has done something wrong, what is wrong with somebody securing some funding in order to pursue their claim? So it's a funny thing when you're like in the inside, you look at it and go, I cannot believe what I do causes so much controversy. I thought by now it would just be a really boring, uncontroversial part of the landscape. But still, here I am 23 years later talking about it, and disabusing people of myths that they have about what it is that we do or don't do.
Yeah. I think it's quite bizarre, really, for all the reasons that you've just said. You're helping bring justice, and it's odd. I think it's odd. But you have played a key role in addressing, these issues of negative public perception, concerns over fairness and who's really in control when there's a funder. So as a founding member of the industry's self-regulating body, how do you ensure that Harbour's involvement supports justice while protecting the, integrity of the legal process?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few aspects to that. I mean, actually, if you start with the current legal position, which still remains, so we haven't abolished champathy and maintenance as torts. What does that mean? What it means is that if you are found to have unduly influenced or sought to control the case in this country, you as the funder risk jeopardizing your investment. Now, that's a very highly motivating standard to make sure that you honor not just the word, but the spirit of the funding agreement, right? So that you are alongside. And look, we have funding relationships that go on for years because a lot of cases take a long time. And it's really important that you have a good relationship, because actually we gain tons of value. But I'm a much better lawyer now than I ever was in practice, because I've reviewed thousands of cases, we've funded hundreds. You get tons of experience in a way that you just don't get exposed to in practice. And our funded parties like that we bring thoughts to the table about saying, oh, we had a thing and this worked quite well, should we try this? But it isn't, we're not there reviewing correspondence and drafting pleadings and doing all of those things. We are simply trying to be a good person to be alongside. So that financial incentive and to be a good partner. So we've seen cases which we haven't funded because we just didn't think the dynamic would work. We didn't think that the parties would get along, and therefore we said, no, we don't think this is a case for us, or we think that the case is going to win or settle, but not win or settle enough, so everybody will be unhappy at the end of it all. So we're trying to be quite thoughtful about that. In terms of things generally, yes, obviously through the association, it's making sure that people behave. We actually get very, very few complaints from people. People who, and often, of the complaints that we have had, they're often from people who are not funded parties, for example. And, it's, and I say often, by which I mean we don't get many complaints, but they're sometimes from people who are not even receiving funding. And so they don't get the protection of the code of conduct because they're not a funded party. So it is about being a good corporate citizen, frankly. And again, if we try to fund, I know this sounds a bit trite or twee, but the good guys. You want the sympathetic claimant. You don't want the unsympathetic claimant who has got a not great history or reputation. Even if their case is technically correct, it's like, a lot of our cases have to remain private because the funded party wants it to remain private. But the way that we look at something on a really basic level is, how would we feel if it were made public that we are funding this case? And we have to say we feel good about that every single time. Look, there are definitely some cases we have funded which you love more than others. The Indonesian seaweed farmers who recovered against an oil company whose oil spill ruined their crops, 0 hours contracts people. You're happier with, inevitably, with those with the, if you like, higher social justice element, but you still nonetheless look at anything and go, I want to be on the side of the certainly apparently right person.
So, even if the case, like if it was a bad guy, if you want to explain it like that, but this person has got a technically sound case, but there's like something in there. I mean, that's why they're in court, right? Will the judge kind of think, what you're doing is technically fine, but I'm still going to really, really look at it because overall what you're doing is a bit, shady, and we're here to serve justice at the end of the day. Would you what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a great book published a number of years ago now, and I think it was certainly, I think, interviews with Supreme Court judges, but also probably a Court of Appeal judges. And to distill the book right down, what they essentially said was, we do look at things and say, who do we think really ought to win here? And then obviously the law has got to fit. And if it doesn't fit, then it doesn't fit, no matter how worthy or not you think the thing is. But yeah, that plays a big part. Jurisprudence was part of one of the subjects that we did at university, and I didn't have much truck with most of it. But one that I did was what's called the American realists, which is, basically we're all humans, and if the judge comes in and he's had a bad day on the way in or an argument with somebody, that's going to affect his view. So make sure you pay attention. And that's true of anybody that you meet, is that whole notion of, what are they bringing into the room with them? Why are they behaving in a certain way? It may feel that that's about you, when in fact it could be about many other things. And I know, I've certainly seen that over the years, of people who, because you then subsequently find out had quite difficult personal things going on, just trying to deal with the person you're dealing with. But it comes back to, though, that I think that is, that people forget that judges are human. And they are like the rest of us, in that they do kind of take a look at the cut of the jib of the person in front of them, and make decisions of character, I think, as much as anything, to the extent, they equally say, a lot of if it's just pure witness evidence and there's nothing in writing, they don't hold much store in that, but they will look at the demeanor of the person and just how they generally behave, as a part of their decision making. So we do the same. If somebody comes into the room, and we've been defrauded a couple of times, And, certainly in one of the cases, uh, if I had trusted my instincts, I would have said, yeah, I knew they were going to behave badly um, early on, and you just have that feeling. And
Yeah.
you should trust that instinct always.
Yeah. I think that's a great piece of advice. Absolutely
Mhm.
fantastic. Go with your gut,
I
trust
think,
your
and I
gut.
think women have great instinct and often talk themselves out of it. And I think should just stick with those instincts, because instinct, another way of describing instinct is it's experience talking to you and telling you things that you have learned and didn't even know you had learned. But your response is not based on nothing. It's based on tons and tons and tons of little signals and signs you have picked up over the years, and that builds your learning.
Yeah, I agree. So, um, I suppose going from human instincts now to AI and other
Mhm.
technologies, how do you see AI and other technologies changing the litigation funding landscape in the coming years?
Yeah, well, I think, look, the people who are in the litigation world most obsessed with their data are funders.
Yeah.
We are way more obsessed with our data than any law firm I encounter, and yet law firms have tons of data, which they should be using to inform how they cost a case, how they run a case, uh, et cetera, et cetera. We constantly are looking back at how did we do, and the original proposal, and what was the value, and what was the cost, and what was the duration, and what have we learned, and therefore when we have future proposals, what does that mean about whether this is we should be varying that and therefore reducing what we think the thing looks like. That we're obsessed by. Now, that's not AI, that's us having had to build our own bespoke system to put that information into, because it's our information. And at the moment, I think there is not. Uh, it feels too sensitive, certainly for funders, to share collectively that information, because people get anxious about confidentiality and privilege and that sort of thing. Where I right now think that it's most valuable, and people get anxious about AI taking away jobs for young lawyers, for example. And the example I give is this: when I was a young trainee, I did, amongst other things, proofreading, photocopying, putting tabs in folders for which the client was charged. Um, and everything was paper, not digital, and. That taught me nothing about cases or case strategy or anything of those things. So, the extent to which AI can remove and enhance the uh, the mundane administrative aspects of a case, good. I think that's a good thing. I was very lucky at Rags that I had a really nice broad experience in my training contract, but I would talk to friends who would be on an aspect of one case for 3 or 4 years. What are you learning if you're on an aspect of one case because you were doing document review, or they've all got legendary stories to tell about being in a shipping container and trawling through documents and blah blah blah. Now, AI and tech and all of that removes all of the need to do that and distills things down so that you can then go, well, what are the important things that are going on here? And what do I need to be looking at? And then sitting with your supervisor to say, okay, what we know about the case is this, and here's the really important things. And you can actually spend more time talking about, frankly, the bit that made us interested in being a lawyer, rather than all those dreary tasks, which enhance nobody's life, and if anything, can end up, I think, putting people off a career in law, when actually what the heart of the matter is, you want to be looking at the analysis of the facts and the strategy and the tactics and all of those things, and that's what's interesting. And I think lawyers need to get better at using all of that And frankly, they can then even charge more because they're charging for the really quality aspect of things. And kind of the other thing is analyze your own data. Be really curious about your own data because they're still not using it enough to inform future budgeting and all those things. And one lawyer I know once said to me when I said, "What do you analyze your past like estimates to actuals on budgets?" I'm not paid to look backwards. And it's like, well, I won't be paying you to go forwards because if you're so arrogant as to think that it's not important to see how well you were doing at budgeting, then that shows me you don't care about the budget that you're handing over to me, and I need to know that you're bothered. Because you're already telling me you don't care really, that this estimate is it won't count for anything in the end. So it's all of those things which can have such a greater role. And what I also liked is because there's this sort of again apocryphal stories about there was these pleadings that had cases that were made up and la 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 la. And I was at a session with where Geoffrey Voss was at London Disputes Week, and somebody said, "Oh, what about this?" And he said, "Look, if you were a bad lawyer before, you're just going to be a bad lawyer with AI. But if you were a good lawyer before, you use the best aspects of AI to make you as efficient as possible." And he said that doesn't change. Good lawyers will continue to be good lawyers. And he was saying, I use this all the time to make me more efficient. But significantly overlaying that, it is always down to me to question and test everything I read. And that's where my experience comes in. So I thought that was just, a neat way of describing not to be overly excited about the notional threat of AI. I think it's only a benefit to get rid of mundane tasks.
Agree with you. I mean, I'm 5 months into my training contract and I use AI to support me in the research tasks that I do, in, the transactional stuff that I do, and in the advisory little bits as well. Because, if I'm drafting something, I need to perhaps make it a little bit more concise. So I just put it into Copilot or whatever and ask it to make it concise for me. And listen, don't get me wrong, I get people saying it may, you need to keep on building those skills or keep working them, because otherwise you may lose the ability to, draft an email. But I can still draft an email. I'm just asking it to tighten it up a little bit. So I don't, yeah, and
just one thing I will make you chuckle because it makes me chuckle to think about it
yeah,
now. When I was a trainee, I did not do well in corporate, in property, and I was in pensions and trusts. It was litigation where I went, oh, this is where I was meant to be. So they couldn't wait to see me go after each of these C's. And one of the criticisms of me was that I was always trying to find the quickest way to the answer, because it was felt that, and this shows you how sort of old-fashioned and in some ways cynical times were, which was you actually need to go and plow through all the stuff in the library, and you need to take ages, and you need to do this. And I now think, good, that was actually a good thing. I'm sitting here with tons of really smart people. Why wouldn't my starting point be, have you ever seen anything like this before? And how did you go about it? And this idea that you are somehow enhanced by fruitless hours researching something which you don't fully understand what you're doing, or you've been given bad instructions about, just seemed to me to be utter madness.
yeah.
But that is a criticism which I own quite proudly, because I still try and find the quickest way to an answer. And I'm always trying to help others do the same by saying, I've got the most phenomenal network. And it's like, if I'm talking to somebody and I can't answer it, I say, you should go and talk to X. They will know the answer to this. Isn't that what we should all be striving for? I would have thought.
I think so. I think it's fantastic to grow your network and pass on knowledge, because I've asked a question before to a member of Chambers that I used to work with when I had this research task. And he didn't know the answer, but he said, like, when you find out, like, let me know.
Mm,
And yeah, I just thought that was quite nice. It's just another way of sharing knowledge, I
yeah,
suppose,
yeah,
and helping other
exactly.
people develop.
Exactly.
So, you do so much. Where do you get your energy from, and what personal habits or mindset underpin your work ethic?
I'm fortunate. My mother in particular is very energetic, and I think obviously I've inherited some of that from her, and she's still very energetic at 82, um, and outperforms people decades younger than herself. Um, so I'm fortunate from that point of view, and certainly people have often said, gosh, where do you get your energy from? And just sometimes you're a lucky person, right? That you have got this natural energy. I'm a morning person, so that helps. And I think my curiosity is something that just continues to drive me. I'm always interested in, oh, what's that? I need to have a little noodle. And I love talking to all these people who are developing technological solutions, some of which are clearly not going to work. And a lot of people come to me to say, what do you think about this? And I'm super happy to kind of provide input and say, well, that won't quite work. And they're doing it just from a tech point of view, and they don't have that experience point of view. I'm always happy to share my thoughts on how things might work and that sort of thing, because I love seeing the innovations that people are doing. And I think that sort of constant um, curiosity about new developments is something that I certainly watched my dad do. My dad had like the first mobile phone. He had the first sat nav, when it cost like at the first Garmin, which was like a great big brick thing that cost over £1,000, whenever this was 20 plus years ago. And so he had a constant curiosity. So I think that is something and he was also, is considering he was an engineer, he was always loved to test a proposition. So to some extent, it wasn't surprising I became a lawyer, because he would just disagree with me sometimes, just for the sake of helping me test my thoughts on things, which could be trying at times, but I discovered was quite helpful ultimately.
Um, that's great. What advice would you give to somebody early in their legal or litigation funding career who wants to make a meaningful impact?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I do think particularly early on, you really do need to be curious. You really do need to be saying yes to everything, and a couple of things really. So the business development, people sort of like, oh, business development, oh, I don't know, it's really hard. And the idea of going to an event and all that sort of thing. So there's a couple of things, because I would end up going to tons of conferences. I would travel a lot. And, then you would keep bumping into some of the same people. And there ended up being a group of us. We did happen to all be women, but that was just coincidence. And we did various different things. So some were from a law firm who were on their own, some from barrister chambers who were on their own, expert witness who were on their own. And we kind of got to the stage where we agreed we would go to an event together, because then between us, we would each have, let's say, 3 people we knew, and we would cross introduce to one another. And that was a super powerful, super informal way of making it way more enjoyable, and B, we were sensible enough to realize that we were no competitive threat to each other, and being realistic about, actually, you just never know, right, about where these things might go. So to the extent you can, I think always try and take a buddy with you, but don't try and then just talk to your buddy that you've taken. You have got to try and get out there. But it gives you a kind of comfort to have somebody going with you. And the other thing is, I don't know whether it's 10 or 15-minute rule whenever I go to anything, which is, if I'm miserable and not finding myself able to have conversation with anybody after 10 or 15 minutes, I can go home.
Yeah.
Nothing is compulsory. And just knowing that's my rule. It is remarkable how rarely I use it, and I've had that since really early on, because I had this sort of sense of like, oh, it must be me. It must be I'm no good at doing this or whatever. No, it may be that you've just gone into a room full of people who themselves are not got much to say. Don't put yourself through it, because you'll feel miserable if you hang around for a long time thinking oh my god, I've got to come up with something to say. So having that kind of get out of jail free card actually is very liberating and makes you feel better. But I do occasionally still use it and go, nope, this is not for me, I'm going home.
So, what about a piece of advice for leadership wisdom you would most like to pass on to the next generation?
Yeah, so I mean, look, I like to think that I've always promoted a collegiate atmosphere, to encourage people to share information, work together, help each other. Really important. I had some coaching about 10 years ago, which I found really, really valuable. And one of the things that this fabulous coach helped me recognize, that because I had been on my own for a while, doing this on my own, and then a team developed, she made me recognize that I was, because I was the most experienced person in the room, I would therefore kind of make the decisions and, do things. And she said, well, you're not going to empower people if you just keep making those decisions, because, yeah, you probably will get to the answer more quickly. But, how about you ask them their thoughts about things? And I was like, well, I'm just trying to be efficient and, getting things done, blah, 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 blah. And so we had our next session a couple of months later, and she said, so how did that go? I said, it turns out other people have some really quite good ideas. And she just laughed. And it was that thing that you have to get over when you've been used to having to do things on your own. As things grow, bring people with you. Really, really important that you bring them with you, discuss whatever ideas they have, create that, if you like, safe space for them to be able to say, well, I wondered about this, and talk about whether that's something that could be useful or not. And I think if you create that atmosphere, oh my goodness, you benefit in spades, because people have got all sorts of different experiences. And it's lovely when you watch people thrive in those circumstances.
Um, I think that that's a really great thing that you do, giving other people the opportunity to challenge themselves a little bit, I
Yeah,
suppose. Because I think that, from personal experience, when you do challenge yourself, that's when you grow. Um, but I do understand how it may be difficult to let go of control, if you like, when it's, the company that you have founded, and ultimately, you have investors and you're running the company i- for, your employees as well. So you've all
yeah,
these things to think about. Um, and so I really do admire, your judgment and how you balance these things. I don't think that's a small task. And I do think that you have to be very experienced and have a very open mind to know what you know, and then welcome in other people's and
exactly. Exactly.
change it. So yeah, I think that
But
is
I think that was because it was really good timing for the coaching to, at a sort of transition point for the future development of the business, because there were other people around by then, and thinking, yeah, there's a risk I could be that person who just goes, well, I know best.
yeah.
And you've got to be really reflective in order to sort of go, yeah, no, I need to help ask others. Otherwise, you still see it. You see kind of big meetings and people who are sitting there silently and not being asked anything and looking a little bit petrified to say anything. And you actually want to encourage people to take part in these things if they're to be able to develop, right? I mean, it's such a crucial part of things. I think the other thing, actually, just thinking about people at the beginning of their career, what I've seen quite a lot of developments of, and I think this is great, and I think if you're starting out, look out for these, is groups that are formed specifically for sort of a certain level. So it's like older people not allowed here, so that you can start building your networks of young associates or even a trainee group or whatever, and without feeling, because you'll then feel all much more on a level, and I think that's more comfortable for a lot of people, rather than thinking, oh gosh, there's some really older experienced people, I daren't speak to them, whatever. Because I think that those are really great places that I've seen develop for practicing your skills at business development and that sort of thing. And then before you know it, your network is referring you cases, and you've all kind of developed together. So I would really encourage people to take part in those sorts of groups as early on as possible, because networks are critical to future development.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, again, when you were talking about your VIP clients and your ambassadors. If you're building a network and people are talking about you and, you've built that reputation, you're building your network of ambassadors there, I suppose, that are going to be your cheerleaders.
Exactly right. Is it because if you have a nice relationship with somebody and somebody comes to them and says, I've got this case, and they go, I've got a conflict, and then they really like you, and they're like, oh, but I know who you should go and talk to. You've created your own club of ambassadors for each other, and that mutual support thing is lovely. And I think, I think lawyers are getting better at this, but there used to be just too much like, oh, I can't, the competitive element. It's all pay it forward. In the end, for me, it's pay it forward. You do that, and it's amazing how things come back around. And I've had things come back around to me years later. One of my favorites was I was walking through Cayman, having various meetings, and when I had a BlackBerry, and I got this email, and it just said, "Oh, Susan, is that you? I just saw walking down the street." And I'm like, "Oh, yes." And it said, "I'm a barrister. And you gave a talk at my chambers 10 years ago. I now work in Cayman, and I've got a case, and I wonder if we could meet to talk about it later." And you just thought, oh my God, you all these kind of like seeds that you're planting, you sometimes can think, oh gosh, am I really making any progress? And then you have something like that, and you just think, yeah, you've got to keep planting the seeds, right? And that is such a constant for me about doing things. And also just the pay it forward thing. I've had people be incredibly kind to me, and I take very seriously the extent that I can be at all help. I can't always be helpful to somebody, but I will always try to do so if I can, because I have benefited from others, giving their time to me to help me develop.
It's just such a nice way to live, isn't it? Where you're,
Well, it's just a better way, isn't it? It seems to me the only way you should live, really.
yeah. So everybody has those top 3 go-to things. So it's inspire, energize, or just make life a little bit better. Whether that's books, podcasts, drinks, you name it. Susan, what are your top 3 right now?
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm feeling quite reflective at the moment, because I'm sort of thinking about, what are the other. So I qualified as a mediator in January, and that was a really good experience to do that. And I think I got really inspired by one of the trainers on the course, who had just come back from I've forgotten now which, maybe it was Burundi, and he'd been working with the government there in the use of mediation in tribal disputes and how that could have a real role. And I am such a fan of mediation. And I just wanted to do the qualification to kind of just be properly informed about the way that it's all done. So I suppose doing that was quite a good thing, because it was different than, just getting a qualification, right? Is something I haven't done in a very, very long time. I do find that just, you know, chatting with friends and um, just and by friends I mean obviously there's friends who are in the legal world and not in the legal world, and I think just keep having those conversations to just learn the stuff of what's going on in the legal community. Just keep talking to people. You don't have to go to all the BD events, but if you've developed a bit of a network and you get together periodically and go, oh, did you know about this or did you know about that? And it's the stuff you can't read in a book or you can't find anywhere else. It just keeps you up to speed with what's in your community. I have to say, post COVID, I've become a lot less of a fan of having lunch or dinner. It just feels like that's less of a thing to do, and I think the sort of shorter meetings. But I'm always up for a Vesper martini, so I'm always open to that suggestion, definitely. But I think my one sort of constant truism is just how much of what I have done has been about constantly engaging with people at all levels. And I think that is also important because there's a risk the older you get that the only people you know are your peers, and that you need to make sure that you mix it up in terms of the good aspiring lawyers that are coming up. And again, just to make sure that they get exposure to interesting cases to enable them to develop. But yeah, I guess I often sort of say, well, I think I get paid to talk for a living. So and you learn a lot, including learning to go nowhere near somebody. That's valuable, helpful stuff too. That to keep developing and honing those networks.
Thank you for sharing your top three. I must say, I have taken a liking to a dirty martini these days. So, yeah, I can appreciate your top three.
Yeah.
The name of this podcast is Taking Care of Business. What does it mean for you to take care of business?
Yeah, and I was sort of reflecting on this, and I think what is business? Business is actually your relationships, and that's your relationships internally with your colleagues, and it is your relations externally with your um, those who are seeking funding, but also the providers of other services. And it's one of the things, it's just little things like, when I was a child, it used to make me very aggravated after Christmas to have to write a thank you letter to an aunt for sending a gift that I wasn't massively keen on, but it was the right thing to do. And it's about that maintaining of contact with people. So, doing the follow up every time you have met somebody and remembering a fact about them that you can reference in that note, so that they go, oh, it wasn't just that was lovely to see you, hope to see you again soon. It was like you've stuck a bit more in their mind because you've shown you were listening and you've remembered a fact about them. And then if you see something that's interesting that relates to them, you follow up. But oh, I saw this and I thought of you. And it is that that's taking care of business, right? It is showing people that you're thinking about them. But taking care of business is both the internal and the external. And it's all about the relationships. This all boils down to human relationships in the end, particularly with what we do. We are not selling cars. We are not selling a thing. We're selling money, which sounds like a weird thing to say, right? But and people don't just choose based on price. They choose based on what is your reputation about how you are to work with. How do you behave to all levels of staff? Really, really important, from the person you first meet on the reception all the way through to the senior person. All of these things are what's really important. And I think it's those relationships which it is so important that you look after. And that, for me, is taking care of business.
I think that was just fantastic. So I want to thank you so much for your time. I want to
My pleasure.
thank you for talking, about your career journey and really just providing all of your insights and advice. I can't thank you enough for spending this hour.
Thank you so much for the invite, and I thank you for the questions, which are really interesting, and that I didn't have to tell the story about how I got into litigation funding. I'm very glad you didn't ask me that, because I feel like I've said that a lot of times and people already know. So it was nice to go down different avenues. So thank you. Great questions.
No, honestly, I want to share, your story, but, obviously you are a very well-known figure. So I couldn't have you on and ask you the same questions that you've told a million times. This wouldn't be fun, would it, at all?
Yeah.